Hello, everybody. We have over 300 guests from over 45 countries joining us today for this in-session talk, Hollywood to Heaven's Gate. Before I introduce you to our esteemed guests, please allow me to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, as you've probably noticed. We'll be able to share a link to the recording after the event. We aim to have a very interactive session today, and we invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button on your Zoom. And please use the chat button if you have any technical difficulties regarding the webinar. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marco, Daniel, and John. I'm going to hand you over to Daniel, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Daniel Birbaum, and I'm a curator, and I'm working in London with a institution, or rather a kind of studio called Acute Art. And I'm very excited about this collaboration with the Royal College of Art. And I am even more excited to have Marco Brambilla, a very visible artist, with us today.
Thank you.
So this conversation is about new possibilities in art. What does it mean when a new medium arrives, or maybe a handful or a cluster of different new possibilities arrive? Today, we have augmented reality, we have virtual reality, we have new institutions showing immersive art. Things like this have maybe happened before. More than 100 years, photography arrived and changed not only how art can reach an audience, but actually what art is. Similar shifts would be cinema and the television moment, the video camera, the internet. I think we're in a very interesting moment right now when things change, and I hardly know any artist on this planet who is as important for this moment as Marco Brambilla. Marco is a Paris-based, he used to be a London-based, but now Paris-based artist who has worked in the context of cinema. He has been in the institutional art world, in the commercial art world. He's done amazing things for the public sphere. And today he is working with new tools, immersive art. The most visible projects right now are, I think, there might be others that I'm not aware of, but there's a show right now at the Next Museum up until May. The Next Museum is in Amsterdam. And just recently, Marco was visible on a very spectacular scale at this new place called The Sphere in Las Vegas. And yeah, this is the second, or not the second collaboration. I've done many things for the RCA, but just last year we had a short course, a collaboration between the RCA and Acute Art. We had other artists like Olafur Eliasson and a few others, very, very prominent people, trying to explore, or actually trying to analyze the situation right now, what art is and what it will be. And I don't really know where to begin, Marco, but if you don't want to add something right away, John, I will just ask a first question. I mean, I know you have a background in the film world, experimental film, but then actually big Hollywood productions. And it would perhaps simply be interesting to hear how it all began.
Yeah, I started making films when I was very lucky because I was immediately interested in one medium. So as early as 14 years old, I was making Super 8 films. I made a short film that won an award at the Toronto Film Festival. I was living in Toronto at the time. And these were all, very non-narrative, short, experimenting with animation stand, solarization, very abstract 5 to 10 minute films. Then I became more involved in, let's say, a more commercial, more conventional film world. And I had my apprenticeship with Ridley Scott when he opened his first office in America. So I was the first director to work for Ridley to direct television commercials. And back then, television commercials were quite interesting because film was always the reference for commercials. So the entertainment value of an ad was much more important than it is today. Today, it's much more about the message. When I was working in that aspect of filmmaking, it was about replicating moments from great films. So I was able, at a very young age, I was 22, 23 years old, I was able to have the resources to replicate something that would look like everything from the movie Brazil to Blade Runner, with all sorts of fairly decent resources, because it was being paid for by advertising agencies and brands. So it was like a crash course in the tools of filmmaking and the very early tools of special effects, because back then we had the very first digital compositing tool, which was called the ADO. It was made by Ampex, and you could composite images together in a very primitive way. But the first people to use that tool were the people making commercials, because it was something that could be done only for very short periods of time. You couldn't do a 2-hour film. You could not do long shots. You could only do 30 seconds or less of visual effects. And then from there, it went to there was another device called the Quantel Harry and then Henry, and that device could handle a little bit more. And I remember making a work which was a campaign for Nike, and I was very inspired by the David Hockney photographs, the Pear Blossom Highway, and the machine-made photographs he had made, which he just had printed, at the local shop. And then his attitude towards photography at the time was, I don't want to take a picture because it's too easy for the viewer to see the picture. So I want to create, what can I do with a picture that makes it more abstract, let's say. And I used that technique in motion. So I was the first person to actually take that technique, and then we shot it with 10 different cameras mounted on this giant device. And then we had to find a way to composite these fragments of viewpoints of a man. It was just a man running through a river stream. And from all the footage, which was shot on all sorts of different film stocks and different filters and colors, we put it into this device called the Quantel Harry. And there was only one person who could run it really well. And he worked with Wim Wenders. He had just finished a Wim Wenders movie called Until the End of the World, which was the first film to ever use HD video, because Panasonic supported the film and he was able to show HD. And I was lucky enough to work with the person who actually knew how to use this device to create a 30-second video, which took approximately 3 weeks to put together, simply because of the computing power at the time was so primitive that to do each version, it was actually much more like an analog digital printer, where you would wait overnight. You would put in a shot, and then the next morning you would see what the results of the composite were, what the color correction was, and then you would do it again, and you would do it again, and it would continue. So it was even in its the nascent electronic tools that we had, and this was around at the same time as Gary Hill was making videos using porta-packs on his back and creating videos using a very clumsy, and it informed some of his work as well, because if you recall, the porta-pack piece he made was the crucifix in the river, and the fact that he had to perform that action with this kind of technology informed the work as well, and it became part of the concept of the work. So I was able to use all these very, very early tools at the very beginning, and then I was offered to work on developing films, and I developed, as many directors do in Hollywood, you develop 10 times the number of projects that are actually able to be produced or come to fruition. I did direct one major film that people know, which is Demolition Man, which was made in 1993. And that was also, I think it was one of the first 3 films to use a digital effect. I wanted to do a lot more with digital effects there, but it just was not the technology. And we had a shot in the film where we had to capture a drop of water crystallizing an entire building, which was flooded with water. And the macro shot was done by a company called R. Greenberg Associates in New York, only company that could do it. It took 2 months to make the drop of water fall into the water. So at that stage, it was, again, all very primitive. And I've been lucky enough to work with some of these tools from the beginning. And then as now these tools have evolved to the point where you've gone from a process where you are waiting for results, or you are very considered in what you can and can't do. And that becomes part of your creative decision-making. But now when you work with, let's say, Unreal. So I did a project a couple of years ago using the Unreal Engine with a company in England through Epic in London. And you see computer graphics now becoming a completely different form, because you're no longer, not only are you not waiting for the results, but you're getting results in real time. So you're plugging in different aspects of what you wish to appear in this particular video. And then the role of an artist or a director becomes almost like it's almost as if you're on a theater stage. It's a performative role. So you're able to input choreographies, music, everything, but it's all done in real time. So there is no delay, there is no time lag, there is no waiting for things to come back. So it fundamentally changes the process of an artist or a filmmaker working to achieve a certain look or visual or any kind of expression in a visual context. And now we've moved into the post. So Unreal, real-time game engine, when Unreal 4 and 5 came out, they offered the promise of very photorealistic graphics. So everybody got very excited about this. Now as of last year, we are able to generate video with text prompts. So it's gone beyond the performative, beyond the authorship of what you're making, is actually become so democratic that for videos that would be shared on social media platforms, for instance, you can now share a film as opposed to a paragraph or a series of pictures. And this is all done, again, in real time. And fairly soon, that technology will also migrate to a telephone. And instead of attaching an emoji or a meme, you'll be able to attach a film that was made from your cousin's holiday in Greece, and there'll be a generative film made from the source material of your memories. So I think technology has always been an integral part of my work. The first video installation I made was in 1998, and it was called Cyclorama, where I attached a film camera to the platform of 9 revolving restaurants across North America. And we erased geography, erased time, and the sunrise came up all at the same time in the 3 different time zones. And this was a machine age, technology. We used some sun tracking, etc., to achieve the purpose, but it was very, very primitive. Then in 2002, I made a work called Half-Life, which was the first work to use actual game engine technology in the making of the artwork itself. So in Half-Life, I went to a small town called Garden Grove, California, where there was a lot of violence attached to gangs forming as a result of massive multiplayer video game called Counter-Strike. And I went and filmed the participants in this massive multiplayer world, 6 to 7 million people at the time. They would go to cyber cafes because they didn't have high bandwidth internet. And we had 7 or 8 live cameras on their avatars inside the game world while we were live on their faces. And this was an installation that was shown at the New Museum, also shown at the Santa Monica Museum, and shown at a couple of galleries as well. And I think that was another form of technology that calls into question our ability to be present, the way communal experiences happen in the virtual world more than in the physical world, perhaps. So I think there's always been this kind of dialogue.
Marco, I think what John and I are very curious about, and I think the audience also, is you left the most commercial Hollywood kind of film world, and I'm sure there are many reasons for that. But everything you do seems so informed by what you have done and your knowledge. I mean, I've actually watched movies with you, and there's no one who knows so much about how things are produced and cameras and all of this. And we can hear this already now in your presentation. But what's interesting is that, I mean, your big Hollywood blockbuster was a kind of futuristic fantasy, and many of the things that were in that fantasy are now becoming almost real. I mean, they're there, or VR and AR and holograms.
Yeah,
and
the first VR scene,
all of this is now kind of actually what we are trying to explore, and it becomes more and more mainstream. And you're one of the people who really push the boundaries here. And I'm curious what it is, not why you're not, happy to do commercial films. I can understand that, because I mean, you're an artist, and you were always an artist, and then you're exploring different worlds. But what is it that one can do in, let's say, immersive spaces that you're doing today, in artworks that you cannot do in film? Maybe you can show us some things or give us examples.
The key thing is that there's no durational aspect to a video piece. So the first thing to think about is there is no durational aspect that you're limited to. So you can have multi-channel works, you can walk from room to room, you use the physical experience of being there as part of the narrative. Doug Aiken made that incredible piece called Electric Earth, which is fantastic as the installation, but doesn't work quite so well when you see it on one channel, because it has that kind of narrative. So I think it opens up all sorts of possibilities as a filmmaker to create psychological narratives. I'm not very interested in dialogue and conventional narrative. So for me, it was a perfect way to experiment in a world where you're freed from those conventions. And as you say, now with VR, with AR now becoming a big thing because of the new device from Apple, that boundary will now be further meshed, because you'll be able to experience some of these effects that you could only do in a museum or physical space. You may be able to actually have objects and videos migrating into your home, into the privacy of your home. You may have people be able to join you to experience a certain thing. So you have this concept of our virtual selves joining other virtual selves, and then the malleability of the presentation itself. Like, what does it mean? And all of this leads us to, it has become more psychological than visual, you could argue. You're entering a psychological state as much as a visual narrative state. So if I'd like to show you a work I made, which relates to some of this conversation, in as much as Marcel Duchamp, when he was painting in the early 1900s, he was also inspired by a new technology, and Edward Muybridge had just taken these incredible photographs using strobe lights. And he saw this, and he thought, well, there may be an interesting opportunity to depict movement in a painting, in a static painting. And he produced a work called Nude Descending a Staircase that created some controversy at the time, because it was quite revolutionary. And I made a piece called Nude Descending a Staircase number 3, which uses machine learning. At that time, it wasn't called AI, it was just called machine learning. This is about 5-6 years ago. And I took 10 people descending a staircase. We had them in motion capture suits, so we understood what their body language was and how they descended the staircase. Then we averaged all 10 people. We created kind of a generic human, and that generic human was then fed through a machine learning program to create a generic movement. So that spoke to the idea of the way people communicate today too, and the kind of array, the diversity and inclusiveness in this new version. And I can show you that now.
Where was it shown? In New York, right?
Yeah, it was shown in New York, and we had the perfect setting, because I really wanted to show it during Freeze. I had access to a 180-foot long LED screen under the World Trade Center that had just opened. And the screen was a transit area. It was in a transit area where you had to go from, Calatrava had designed, the whole renovation, and this particular section had massive amounts of people walking through. So this piece, you're going to see it on a small computer screen now, but this was actually first shown as a 180-foot LED wall video installation. There's also more.
It's interesting, Marco, how you've captured the kind of proto-cubist element of Duchamp's original in the forms.
And and this is very, again, when I look at this now, I look at it and I think, my God, if I was making this today, it would, because the technology changes so quickly, and especially when you're dealing with machine learning. And yeah, here's the installation for you. You can see the actual. Can you see the installation? So this was this.
Marco, I was unaware of the Ridley Scott connection, and Ridley, in fact, is a graduate of the program I'm head of, the painting program at the RCA. But infamously, Ridley said that, why he stopped painting was because he couldn't bear the loneliness of a studio. And I wondered, what could you tell us a little bit about your studio makeup?
It's also quite lonely. I mean, it's much lonelier than making a film, because when you're making a film, obviously you're working with hundreds of people. You have a certain zone that you enter creatively, simply as a result of the amount of money dependent on your ability to make decisions quickly. So you're working with teams of people and reacting very quickly, which gives you a very adrenalized state of mind when you're working on it. When I work on a personal project, an art installation, I usually work in the studio to prototype the installation, so to create, let's say, a very detailed motion prototype that means I won't change my mind too many times before I get to the final. Then when I enter into a larger special effects facility, like, for instance, Daniel mentioned earlier, the Sphere has a 16K resolution. So there's no way for me to produce that inside a studio setup. There's no way to have the access to the type of technology that's necessary. And then you're working with a team of 20 people, and then it approaches the state of being when you're on a film set, because at that point you're also spending vast amounts of money, having to make decisions very quickly, and working with multiple groups of people who are working on different aspects of the project. And just as creatively, I love being in that zone. So for instance, last summer, we had a very short amount of time to produce the work. And I spent 3 months immersed in that state of mind, which is very similar to making a film, because the amount of pressure and the focus it requires is very different from giving yourself deadlines that change and move. So I like having that kind of structure as well.
I mean, the theme of the moment, every newspaper writes about AI, and I know you were actually one of the very first people to introduce what you refer to now as machine learning into the creative process of one of your pieces. And I know you're revisiting that realm now also a little bit. What are your thoughts about AI and how one can use it in an interesting way?
I've become very intimate with it over the last year. In many different ways. I used it on the project for the Sphere as a craft tool that would allow me to access vast amounts of film samples in a very short amount of time, because I just didn't have the time to physically have editors looking through materials. So we were able to train an AI model to simply locate shots. So it was basically like a filing system that's much more efficient than a human being to do that. We were also able to create sketches of different aspects of the compositions using AI. And this is where it gets a little bit more dangerous, because I think when you're having a direct dialogue with that kind of technology, which is real time, and it often deviates from what your intention was, you're able to incorporate some of that, and then a lot of it is not accurate. And the more specific you try to become with results from AI, whether it's a text prompt or visual prompt, it has a resistance. There's a natural resistance to become specific. The technology by its very nature is an encyclopedic aggregator. So try to be specific is kind of philosophically at odds at the way the technology is designed to function. And I thought that was interesting too. So I decided to make a work which would be born from AI, that would speak to the way AI, it has the ability to transform our past. It has the ability to transform the way we communicate. It's already transformed the way many people write emails even. So I think this next project, which is called Approximations of Utopia, deals with a series of finite geographical and chronological milestones, which have now been fed into the machine, and the machine is now telling us what happened. It's based on World Expos, and then I focused on 6 World Expos. The first one being Brussels with the Atomium, which was the first kind of futuristic architecture in an expo. And when you're giving the AI the prompts to reinvent this, to resurrect it, it's creating all sorts of different forms of fantastical architecture, which really never existed. I mean, they look much more seductive and they're animated. And if you put in the number of visitors that went to that expo, it will try to present to you these kind of crowds, but also it doesn't understand walking, so the crowds are floating around. So you have all these incredible experiments that happen, and then you're more than being a liberating tool, it's actually showing you what the limitations are. So it's actually demonstrating its own limitations as you're working with it. So as an artist, I think what you try to do is to use it to sketch. And then you're sketching what the intention of this technology would be and how it can distort information and visual information and text information. And then let's say we're now believing in that distortion. Let's say we are now accepting that distortion as reality. Many artists have done this in the past where they'll write a fake. Duchamp did this when he wrote like a fake ad with Man Ray, and then they put it into the registry so it became part, or even the National Library in Washington has many things that are not real, but they became real because they're now registered in the National Library. So in fact, our past becomes consensus driven. So the consensus of the way AI will affect Google searches, the way it will contaminate search engines. And the type of AI that Google is working on right now is actually even more insidious because they're working on a type of AI that will memorize every search you've ever done and create a version of reality that will be tailored to your specific worldview that may have nothing to do with an accurate background.
Marco, I know the piece is not launched and it's premature maybe or something, but you also said that we might see a few seconds.
Yes, of course. Yes, let me show you. I'll show you some of the very. I'll show you an early version of the presentation here. We're using AI, obviously, but this is a multi-format installation, so it uses 2-dimensional projections. It uses a multi-screen projection, and with Heaven's Gate, which was a piece I made about 3 years ago, we also had a very, very different kind of formats that the piece can be shown, and it was shown outside the sphere. Let me show you this one. Okay. Okay, so can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an earlier work. This is a video collage, so this is based on film samples. It's and this uses a little bit of AI to simply find the film samples. But this will show you the various incarnations it had. So this was on the outside of the sphere. This is at a venue called Outernet Arts in London. And this was during Freeze just recently projected on the Chateau Marmont. And as you were mentioning earlier, we also are showing this piece at the next museum in a slightly different format. So each presentation has a slightly different version of the work. And I've gotten used to that. At first, I was very much against that, actually. I thought each work should have just a finite kind of presentation method. But I think when you talk about immersive spaces and when you talk about there's versatility in the piece, I think for certain work, it's very interesting to be able to play around with individual channels. And, now they're building these holographic screens that are really interesting, which I may use for the gallery version of Approximations of Utopia, where you look like you're looking into a hologram. It's a moving hologram, but it's a special screen. So all of that means making the work, making the template of the work, the source material, and then adapting it to different site-specific situations. And I've always loved working in site-specific ways. In New York, I made quite a few site-specific installations around the city, and those have always been some of the most satisfying because not for the least of which that the general public gets to see them in a context that's not going. Some people which would not go to a museum show, would not go to a gallery, get to see something that's an intervention on the city.
About Heaven's Gate, I mean, now we're all overwhelmed by the size of your, what like, let's say the sphere or these unbelievably large projections, but it's an example again of how the world of cinema informs most of what the stuff you're doing. I mean, you didn't say really much about what it is, but it's a very complex collage of moments from important films, right?
Correct. So the idea was, it came from this idea of film having become spectacle at the turn of the century. You had people burning ships on stage to create more appeal for audiences in theater, and film for the last 20 years at least. It's become increasingly more about the spectacle of the film, especially to get people to come to the theaters and not to see films at home, let's say. So I think I wanted to make a work that comments on the removal of narrative, the removal of meaning, the removal of significant dialogue, and trap these characters into a canvas that was much more Baroque and much more about the idea of a hyperspectacle. So it's like, let's make it completely meaningless other than the meaning we've superimposed onto it from the canvas itself. So the canvas itself is the most obvious Renaissance themes and Dante's Purgatory. So these are very basic signposts, but now we're populating them with everything from Leonardo DiCaprio to Kim Kardashian and this kind of hyper sensory world.
I mean, you're showing your works at incredible places. I actually wonder a little bit about the sphere. I mean, it's the most spectacular of anything. I haven't been there, but it looks like the most unbelievably spectacular venue there is on the planet. At the same time, I wonder a little bit, what's the ideal place to see it? Is it, you have to see it from an airplane, basically.
Yeah, for the outside, but the inside is actually the most incredible because the resolution is so high that when I first went to test the work, I was completely mesmerized. I mean, I've tried all the VR headsets. We've seen even Outernet, huge resolution, etc. But when I came into that space, that level of detail and that level of immersion with the field of view, it creates a whole other viewing condition. I mean, it's a very different way to look at things, and I hope they find ways to show more work there that's more experimental, because the problem is, since it's such an expensive venue and they need to appeal to, I mean, it's situated in Las Vegas, so it's not known for its cultural obsession. So you wonder, how can you show experimental work in that context? I was very lucky to.
Yeah.
Marco, I want to try to keep this straightforward and simple, but it strikes me that you're critiquing this spectacle that we're surrounded by from within, or as spectacle. And I wonder if you've ever considered the impact that has, say, on the visuality of many of your works, your more the megaplex works, because as captivating as they are, I find them, I mean, they're incredibly visually rich, but at the same time resistant to almost being able to consume as an image, because
Yes.
it's a total flow. I mean,
That's very.
There are only moments or fragments that you can really grasp.
But that's very much like the way if you were to walk into a multiplex today and you see there's 6 films showing and they all seem to vaguely have the same kind of apocalyptic theme with a superhero, etc. They're also very hard to grasp even on a single channel because you don't have the humanity to it. So the distance is part of that work. I mean, I hope it comes through, and I hope people understand that. And some people just look at it because it's got great colors and it's immersive. But hopefully, I mean, it's a very fine line, because obviously when you're using technology like that and you're presenting something like that, you open yourself up to this idea of, has it become as banal as what it's criticizing? So that's something you have to, try to maneuver. And that's also in the context in which you show it. You want to show it in a context where it's considered in a way that people can look at it 3 times back to back and can kind of absorb those layers of meaning that may not be there upon first viewing.
That's where the loop, I suppose,
Right.
becomes very important.
Correct. Absolutely. And most people stay 3 times, and older people feel overwhelmed, and they don't particularly, I mean, makes some people uncomfortable, especially in a large space. Whereas people under 30, younger people, it's not enough. Why aren't there more samples?
Yeah. I've been wondering a little bit about the impact of these new mediums on not only on art itself, but actually its institutions. And you're exploring all these spaces that are new and a bit different. In a way, Times Square has been around for a long time, but now you take the whole thing and you use every single screen. And I'm wondering, we did an AR piece together, or rather we produced something with Kate Blanchett it was your piece. And that's something that can be seen anywhere. Anyone with a telephone can see it. And there's a kind of, let's call it democratizing potential there, that you don't have to be at a museum or an institution. It can be anywhere. And these new technologies can actually lead to something interesting, in the sense that, art will take place wherever there's electricity, wherever there's internet, basically. And I mean, I'm a bit curious about what you think will happen to the traditional institutions, or will there be entirely new institutions? I mean, in a way, you mentioned 2 already. Outernet, it's in the middle of London. It's not an institution, perhaps. It's just a venue with incredible screens. The Sphere is not an art institution, but it's now used by artists like you. But what do you think? I mean, the traditional art world as we know it, or at least since a quarter of a century, has been traditional museums, but then also events, festivals, let's say biennials and art fairs, and people travel the world. One interesting thing with these new mediums is perhaps that you don't really have to travel. Art can be everywhere. It can be a little bit, especially if it's, digital or virtual or AR and all of that. Do you think that there will be entirely new institutions? So this is a huge question that I don't even fully understand myself, but I'm wondering what the impact will be.
I hope there will, because I think there's a part of the appreciation of looking at something which doesn't make conventional sense, that doesn't have a conventional narrative, that doesn't convey important information. You need to psychologically be open to it. So I think the idea of walking through the threshold of a museum or a venue, a physical space, psychologically, you're probably in a different state of mind from accepting that work in a different way. In fact, many films today, they open on black for a long time. There was a film called Tar. I don't know if anybody saw it, with Kate Blanchett, and that opens on the title sequence at the beginning. And the title sequence has music, and it's a 7-minute title sequence just to detox the audience before you see the film. Zone of Interest, same thing. There's a threshold that's built into it. These new mediums like AR and VR don't necessarily have that threshold. So you're fighting with the noise level of the world, and the noise level may be appropriate for the work that you're showing, or it may be completely not appropriate. So I think what you've done in the past, I know that you've actually had works that have been geolocated to specific places like the Serpentine, like spaces where it allows for a more contemplative way to look at the work. Like the ice cube appeared in many places. The more successful places were the ones perhaps where you were able to actually engage with it in a different way, because it's not a piece that would work so well.
Also, your AR piece with Kate Blanchett was part of some of those shows we did. And we did group shows with electronic sculptural works, basically, and they could be in Singapore and Buenos Aires and Montreal and New York at the same time. And we didn't ship anything. And, it's not, it's not instead of traditional art, but it's an additional possibility that I actually do think will be part of some new formation when maybe the way that we have lived on this planet and the way the art world has developed is not totally sustainable in the long run, with big audiences traveling the world, shipping sculpture. There are possibilities. I'm not saying that this is the solution to do AR shows instead of physical shows, but it can certainly be, an additional layer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we have questions from the audience. I mean, there are hundreds of people listening here. We feel like we're talking three people, but it's actually a very well attended conversation. This, I don't know how this will work.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you. I'm happy to just provide one of the questions from our audience. We have one question from Sharon. We can create an environment that mimics the top of Mount Everest, but the visitors haven't had the experience of the struggle to climb to the top. How do we fill in the history, backgrounds, so visitors can properly understand what they're experiencing?
This is something Marco clearly can answer. No, sorry.
Well, that's a very good question, but that's actually the opposite of what we're. I think these new mediums that we're talking about actually, unfortunately, dispose of a lot of the moments in time that you're able to become more informed about the background of a work. So if you're talking about a very technological work, I think that's why I call it psychological, because I think it becomes more of an intuitive process, which I think anyway, it is anyway. I think understanding a great painting or a great photograph is intuitive. I mean, it's important to have context, but at the same time, I think the context for some of these works comes from the place that's presenting it. So if you go into the Tate Turbine Hall and you see a work, you have context there. There's a context, and in a physical space, when you're able to show work, even if it's very large scale, you have wall text. I mean, specifically for the Times Square piece, for instance, I have text that explains these pavilions, why they're there. So there is some context, but in this very fast-moving world, I think it becomes, more difficult to do the homework and the background required. It has to be done in the privacy of your home.
I mean, one can of course write a poem about anything, and one can make a painting about anything, and you haven't experienced it's part of what fiction is all about. But virtual reality, for instance, is still limited to the visual world and what you can hear, more or less. I mean, a more realistic VR would then include smell and taste and touch, and a totally perfect virtual reality world. There are science fiction movies about that. Would involve all the senses. I mean, this is a more technological question, but do you think that will happen, Marco?
They're already doing that with wind and smell and all of that. I mean, I guess it always depends on the concept. If the concept requires it, then it's a great thing. But sometimes these things are just added as a gimmick value. It's not really central to the concept. Do we have another question? I see a lot of questions coming up.
Lots of questions now. You can maybe pick.
Thank you. We have another really good one from Susan Zabrowska. As an artist and educator, how do you resolve the almost supernatural magic imbued in the simplicity of film as compared to the soullessness of digital and AI? Has the human been lost along with the meaninglessness and narrativeness?
It sounds very tragic, but I mean, I think we're already living in a media landscape where you could argue that with or without AI or anything, we've lost a certain kind of organic ability to communicate or share ideas, or, the systems are now there for us to already be ready for AI to finally, give us what we think we need to see. And I think that can be viewed as a renaissance, or it could be viewed as the apocalypse. I think it's a question of your own personal, point of view. I think it's definitely happening. It's definitely not something that's going to go away. I think it's not like a trend. I think it does help people express. Some people use it to express themselves, and some people use it to contribute to the noise level that suppresses self-expression. There's one about scraping AI. What are your thoughts on the situation? One who's disinfecting. Can they be scraped for AI training and commercialized? Did you see that one, Joe? Is that okay to answer that one? That's an interesting topic actually right now, because the idea of copyright and the idea of being able to use someone's style and appropriate the style is now accessible to anyone. So anyone can make an Andy Warhol screen print. And does that call into question, Warhol probably would have loved it because, everywhere. But I think for certain artists, if their work is online, then it's all fair game. So the work that's online is all used to create many, many AI models. And even more specifically, when you work with certain softwares like Stable Diffusion, or there's a software called Magnifique now, where you upload images, everything you upload is memorized and recorded, and it goes into the database. So your work, whatever your work may be, and I upload an image from the work I just showed you, that image has now gone into their database, and it's being used to train the model for other people who may want to go in and do that. It was like when you have self-driving cars, the AI model that helps self-driving cars avoid obstacles or unpredictable situations. Once one car learns something and there's an accident, every car learns that event. So it's self-propagating, and that's what's happening with ChatGPT. The more people use it, it's progressing exponentially, because the more people use it for text, especially with text now, it's become a big deal. For visuals, it's less so, because less people are using AI for visuals. But I'm sure there'll be this kind of homogeneous. This kind of model creates homogeneity. That's what it's designed to do. So then I'm sure there'll be a resurgence. I mean, there are people already talking about labeling certain work human-made versus AI-made. So there's already this distinction being drawn, anticipating what's going to happen in the future as AI becomes more sophisticated.
There's a very specific question about your node descending. Not sure 100%. Should I read it?
I don't.
I have it here. Thank you for showing the node. I was wondering how you look at the repetitive mode of this work. I'm currently working with holding patterns like a screensaver or white noise. How do you look at the fast life cycle of content production nowadays in relationship to the slow rhythm of the work? Curious on your thoughts on how a commercial environment would respond to this when implemented.
Well, I think the data that's being used to generate it is instantaneous and very fast. So it has like a resonant frequency. It's a harmonic of the work. And I think that's an interesting question, because the actual final result from all that data, all the 10 motion capture data, with each motion capture suit had like 10 sensors. So all that data coming together is actually quite high velocity, but we're using it to create something very soothing and very, very gentle. So I don't think there's any correlation between the final work and the way it's been made originally. So I think if you were to look at all the data I used to create that channel of approximations of Utopia, you wouldn't be able to see the work, because there's just so much information going in. So I chose to curate only the data that would be relevant or most relevant to each piece. So I think under the surface, there's obviously a lot of technology going on, and it can be used to create meditation videos as well, or it can be used to create, very rapid fire fast cut action movies.
There's one question that I'm a bit curious about by someone called Philip, and it's to do with the breakthrough of VR and when this will actually be real and go mainstream, basically. I mean, I know that VR has been around for decades as an idea, and then it was around at very specialized art schools and universities like MIT or ZKM in Karlsruhe, and people have been talking about it in the 1980s and the 90s. And now the question goes, in your opinion, when will XR eyewear make a major breakthrough into the mainstream? Would people adapt to wearing Googles in the next years? For instance, Vision Pro, or does their form factor need to become massively smaller for general adoption? When will VR be mainstream?
Yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, I think so. I think if this is generation 1 that we just saw with the Vision Pro, which has incredible resolution and functionality, and version 4 becomes more portable and less intrusive, then I'm sure it'll become part of the mainstream.
I remember some years ago when I started to be interested in this simply as a kind of possibility for a visual experimental possibility for art. It was clear it wasn't mainstream at all yet. And then people said it will come in a few years. And it almost seems like it's a little bit away, a few more years, but it's never really quite there. A little bit like the turtle and the hare, like that Zeno's paradox. It's almost there, but not quite. And then I remember I was in a taxi with the owner of a big VR company, or the daughter of the owner, and she said it will go mainstream 2023. It's already 2024 now. And then other people say it will go, it will happen when Apple decides so, which is a scary kind of comment, but that might be the case. And I guess it's being launched right now, right?
Yes, and in the States, it's been here for about a month and a half, and it's too heavy and too, it's not really a practical tool to watch films or to even work on your computer. I mean, it's designed to do everything. So it's designed to basically be something that you would wear for hours a day to do everything from answering emails to watching films and create this new working environment and entertainment environment. But it's just the weight and the intrusion of it will keep it from. I don't think that's going to happen for at least another 4 or 5 years. But it may happen.
Yeah. There are many questions. There's one question that I think John and I are interested in, because we did this short course last year with some very important artists trying to explore these new mediums. And clearly people are very interested. We did a little presentation at the big auditorium at the RCA, and it was packed. And we were only, talking about things just like we're doing now, showing some stuff. And the average age of these people is maybe 20, I don't know, early 20s.
25.
Yeah. And so I wonder a little bit how it might change art education. It's a world that I've been very close to. I mean, I was the dean of an art school, and of course the video camera changed everything for the film class and all of that. But will it change what will a future art school look like then?
Well, we toyed with this question even in the kind of debriefing of our first short course last year, that we were teaching very new hot media in very much a kind of old school analog discursive kind of way. And I think it has to do really with the glasses. When we're almost already there, because no longer, say in a tutorial, do you write down a reference to an artist or a text, immediately a screen comes out and it's before your very eyes. So it has to do, no doubt, with the weight of the glasses, and then also the accessibility. I mean, they clearly can't, they can't be a few thousand, So maybe it's more of a merger, a bit like the cardboard, VR, headset that you can slide your phone into. That there needs to be something that bridges the gap of
What do
accessibility.
you think, Marco? I mean, this is actually part of an art school, what we're doing right now.
I think
Yeah.
great for those applications. It's fantastic. It's actually much easier to imagine VR being used to go anywhere and see anything in a very immediate way. It's much harder when people talk about VR replacing cinema or creating narrative, because Kodak built a 360 theater at the Expo in New York in 1964, and nobody's making 360-degree films because it's just not the way we look at narrative. It's just not the way you need a POV, you need to be able to edit. So in terms of replacing certain things like film, artworks, I mean, not everything is meant to have that kind of interactivity, but for surgeons are now using Vision Pro. It's used in the technology sector quite a bit. It's used because it enhances productivity as much as it would enhance the ability of students to actually go up close to a sculpture that they would never be able to see in a compelling way, in a very good quality. So for those applications, it's actually a natural, it's a teleportation tool in a way, more than it creates its own storytelling or anything like this. I don't think that's...
No, I remember I was, asked whether VR will be in museums and biennales and so, and just to confuse people, I said maybe museums will be in VR. And I think it's the same thing with schools. I mean, of course, VR headsets are all over RCA already, but maybe in the future, the school will be inside the headset, basically, that we will teach inside these. I mean, we're already doing it here on a visually very meager platform called the Zoom, I guess. But say it would be three-dimensional and we would have the feeling that we're with the audience in a room. That's interesting, I think. I think we're meant to kind of summarize. And since there's no way to summarize all of this, I think we simply say thank you to Marco for joining us. And it's been
Very
fun.
well. Pleasure.
Thank you
for having me.
Thank you very, very much, Marco and Daniel and John, for the really lovely conversation, very interesting points, and thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. Daniel and John will co-lead the Present Futures VR and AR in Art short course this coming May, with Marco as our guest speaker. And we're really excited for this. The next in-session talk is scheduled on the 11th of April with Adrian Shaughnessy, Fuel and Plan B, about independent publishing. We will share a link to the recording of this session with everyone who registered for this event. We would like to thank you for your time.